Hey guys, tonight we plunge straight into one of the most forgotten mythological disasters in Mount Olympus history, the day Apollo, god of the sun music, and absolutely no chill, decided to throw a full-blown tantrum over, yes, a chair. You're standing in the golden courtyard of Olympus light, bouncing off polished marble columns. The sky is a permanent afternoon. Birds sing in perfect pentatonic scales. Somewhere in the distance, a musically inclined satyr is practicing the lyre and repeatedly failing a high F. You stroll past a pool where nymphs are trying to organize synchronized swimming. Everything is well too awake for your current energy levels. And then you see him, Apollo, radiant, perfect posture, laurel crown slightly askew in a very curated way, and absolutely seething because someone took his favorite seat. Now, in the mortal realm, chairs are a dime a dozen. But on Olympus, chairs, or more accurately thrones, are sacred indicators of status, cosmic alignment, and in some cases, petty vendettas. And Apollo's seat, the one carved from solar oak with golden rays fanning out like a halo, it has been claimed by Brace Yourself, Athena. Athena, of course, did not mean to offend. She was just coming back from a particularly long, mortal strategy meeting, probably about hoplite formations or owl logistics. She needed a seat. She chose the sunny one. Apollo saw it as high treason. You can almost hear the dramatic pause before he says, "That's my seat," in a tone only sung in minor key. And when Athena shrugs and says, "It's a chair, you know it's over." Sparks fly literally. He emits a small solar flare and accidentally ignites the ceremonial fig tree. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know what country and time are you listening from right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Apollo storms off. You trail behind him. He's muttering about respect and divine pecking orders and something about musical royalty. You pass Hera, who's sipping nectar and pretending not to notice the drama. But her smirk gives her away. As you float along beside him, you realize this isn't just a bad day. This is going to escalate. Historians still argue whether Apollo's overreaction stemmed from genuine insecurity or just an allergy to sharing. Either way, you watch as he stalks into the throne room and does the unthinkable. He refuses to sit. He just stands arms crossed, casting very judgmental shadows across the chamber. Now here's the quirky bit. Olympians were not built for standing. Despite their immortal muscles and perfect bone structure, they despise standing still. Movement. Sure. Flying, absolutely. But standing for a long time, absolutely not. So when Apollo boycotts sitting, everyone notices. He's weaponizing discomfort. And with each passing hour of his upright protest, the atmosphere gets tenser. Zeus raises an eyebrow. "Is he pouting?" Hermes whispers. "Do we clap? Or—" You decide to stay neutral. Watching divine egos collide is like watching dolphins do taxes, confusing, slightly majestic, and extremely unproductive. It's important to note here that throne politics were a real thing in ancient myth. The 12 Olympians had official seats, just 12, and that number mattered. Hestia eventually stepped down to let Dionysus in, which is possibly the only peaceful resignation in divine history. So yes, seats carried meaning. But inventing an entire philosophy around who gets to sit and how long, that's uniquely Apollo. By sunset, the courtyard is abuzz. A crowd has gathered. Even the muses have paused their eternal karaoke to gawk. Apollo stands like a very shiny statue refusing to fold. "I shall not rest," he proclaims, "until justice is seated." You ask quietly, "Does that mean you'll never sit again?" He glares. "No, it means I'll sit, better than anyone ever has." A beat passes. Ares snorts. What does that even mean? And that, dear listener, is when you realize the seed of a wildly unnecessary myth has just been planted. Right here, among gold columns and gossiping gods, all because someone stole a sunny spot. You follow Apollo as he storms into his private wing of Olympus, an ostentatious, sun-drenched annex decorated entirely in reflective surfaces, harp strings, and cushions shaped like sunflowers. His sandals click aggressively against the marble, which is awkward because you weren't aware sandals could click aggressively. Still fuming from his perceived throne theft, Apollo paces back and forth in front of his glowing vanity mirror, muttering something about architectural injustice and the tyranny of elbow rests. His twin sister Artemis pokes her head in, briefly assesses the mood, and immediately retreats like someone backing away from a very territorial swan. Eventually, the tension simmers into something more productive, or at least more performative. Apollo stops pacing, lifts his chin, and announces mostly to himself but loudly enough for Olympus to hear, "There shall be a reckoning of posture." He's talking about Athena. Still. Which, to be fair, is classic Apollo behavior. He has a memory like a papyrus scroll soaked in ego, long, dramatic, and impossible to edit. You might expect Apollo to duel Athena with music or prophecy, or by throwing sunlight at her with excessive flair. But no, that would be too normal. Instead, he takes the more chaotic route. He summons a council meeting to discuss seating ethics. Zeus reluctantly agrees to host it because, quote, "I haven't had a good throne-related squabble since Hephaestus glued Hera to her chair." That's a real myth, by the way. Greek mythology is 40% drama, 30% petty revenge, and 30% miscellaneous goat transformations. The gods gather in the amphitheater of eternal disagreement, a colosseum specifically designed for family feuds and dramatic monologues. You take a seat on one of the cloud-formed bleachers and watch as Athena arrives, book in hand, entirely unbothered. She is flanked by a small flock of owls, which makes sense given her personal brand. Apollo stands dead center, arms crossed, chin up, golden rays framing him like a divine weather warning. He accuses Athena of territorial selfishness, indignity against heliocentric hierarchy, and most absurdly willful solar obstruction. Athena blinks slowly and says, "It was a seat." There is a silence. Then Hera coughs. Zeus sighs deeply and lifts his lightning bolt like it's a ceremonial gavel. "Write new rule, we're assigning seats by rotation. Everyone gets a sitting schedule. End of melodrama. Cue the eruption of divine outrage. Ares demands 2 chairs, 1 for each bicep. Demeter wants hers outdoors because wheat needs air. Dionysus just wants his made of wine corks. Hermes casually requests a chair with wheels, and cup holders and snack compartments, and maybe a foot massage spell. Apollo refuses to sit at all now. "I will not participate in rotational throning. I'm the sun." The sun doesn't rotate, it blazes. Historians still argue whether Apollo's disdain for rotation was astronomical ignorance or just another case of cosmic main character syndrome. Either way, the seating council disbands in chaotic disapproval. As everyone shuffles off, muttering about lumbar support, Athena leans over to you and murmurs, "He's going to make this worse." She is unfortunately right. Because that night you sneak past rows of sleeping nymphs and snoring satyrs only to find Apollo wide awake, sketching wildly on a parchment with golden ink. Diagrams of chairs, equations about seated duration, charts titled Prestige versus Posture. He's not just upset anymore, he's planning something. The next morning, with birds still rubbing the sleep out of their tiny eyes, Apollo gathers everyone again. He stands atop a pedestal carved from sunbeam fragments and declares, Let the first Olympian sitting contest commence. He calls it the Sit-A-Thon of glory. Aphrodite raises an eyebrow. You mean like, who can sit the longest? Yes, Apollo hisses, and with the most grace. Hermes, chewing on a fig tart, shrugs. Honestly, I'm in. And just like that, a pantheon of immortals with world-altering powers agrees to test their divine limits by not standing up. It's as ridiculous as it sounds. And you grab a snack, find a nice patch of cloud, and prepare for the slowest competition in Olympian history. The day of the Sit-A-Thon dawns gloriously, theatrically, and with absolutely no warning to mortals below. The sky above Greece glows an unnatural shade of smug gold. You can feel the heat from Apollo's ego before you even arrive at the arena. The setting, the Amphithronos. Maximus, a hastily conjured Colosseum, made entirely of reclining benches, oversized beanbags, and ergonomic footstools made from clouds shaped like llamas. The muses are already there taking bets in drachmas on who'll fall asleep first. Someone's selling ambrosia popsicles out of a floating cart. You settle into a cushion with excellent lumbar support and watch as the Olympians file in, each more absurdly prepared than the last. Athena arrives with an annotated scroll titled, "The Theory of Tactical Stillness." Dionysus shows up in pajamas with a flask that clinks suspiciously. Ares flexes so hard his chair cracks slightly, but he pretends not to notice. Apollo floats into view last cloaked in a cape made of literal sunbeams. It has embroidery. It spells, "Seating Sovereign." You wish you were making that up. He raises both arms and proclaims, "Today we determine who among us holds the throne, not by conquest but by calm endurance." There's a polite smattering of applause from a confused satyr. Zeus, seated in a thundercloud recliner, mutters, "Get on with it before I unmake someone." Then, in classic Apollo fashion, he unveils the rules. You brace yourself. Rule 1. No divine enhancements, no floating, levitating, cloud-forming invisibility cloaks or time pausing. Rule 2. No fidgeting, no bouncing knees, no foot tapping, no humming, no casual stretches. Rule 3. No external distractions, no books, no knitting, no divine communication through owl messengers. Rule 4. Bathroom breaks are permitted, but each incurs a 37-minute penalty. Rule 5. You may not fall asleep. Dozing disqualifies you. Snoring is instant shame. Hermes raises a hand. Define dozing. Apollo replies, "If I have to define it, you're already out." Historians still argue whether these rules were written in the spirit of fair play or crafted entirely to favor Apollo's unusually smug spine. Either way, the gods accept them because, let's face it, they love drama almost as much as they love being worshipped. Each deity finds their designated chair. They're all absurdly customized. Aphrodite's is encrusted with pearls and smells faintly of roses. Poseidon's is damp and suspiciously barnacled. Demeter's sprouts wheat from the armrests. Hephaestus welded his from molten bronze, and it gently hisses when sat upon. And then there's Hestia. Sweet, quiet, often overlooked Hestia. She sits cross-legged on a plain wooden stool. No backrest, no cushion, no theatrics. Just sitting. You almost don't notice her. But then you do. And you file that away for later. At Apollo's signal, a blinding beam of noonlight that scorches one unlucky pigeon, the Sit-A-Thon, begins. Time slows. Silence spreads. You'd think a Colosseum full of immortal beings could sit quietly with dignity. You would be wrong. 30 minutes in Hermes is already bouncing one foot, pretending it's a vibrational weather pulse. Dionysus loudly opens a flask and offers hydration shots to everyone nearby. Ares growls every time someone shifts, which is roughly every 4 seconds. Aphrodite hums love songs under her breath and flutters her eyelashes suspiciously. "Apollo," he beams. He sits bolt upright, ankles precisely parallel, spine aligned with celestial longitude. It's the most uncomfortable-looking comfort you've ever seen. Then Zeus, bored beyond divine tolerance, creates a thundercloud slideshow titled Famous Historical Chairs Through the Ages. You learn far more about ancient Mycenaean footstools than you ever wanted to know. Still, the Sit-A-Thon continues. Hours pass, postures sag. Morale wilts like ambrosia left in the sun. But there's Hestia, silent, unmoving, breathing like the hearth fire itself. You start to wonder, maybe this isn't just about sitting. Maybe it's about patience, humility, grace, or maybe it's just who has the best blood circulation. Either way, the gods are getting twitchy. And you're just getting comfortable. Several hours into the Sit-A-Thon, and Olympus has entered what the ancient Greeks never formally recorded, but definitely experienced, the great divine fidget era. You recline slightly, nibbling on a fig that may or may not be enchanted, watching as the gods descend into low-level, high-stakes discomfort. The energy is tense like a harp string right before it snaps and flings into someone's ambrosia. Enter Hera. You'd think the queen of the gods would be above this nonsense. But no. Hera doesn't just show up, she arrives. Two cyclops roll out a crimson carpet. Her throne floats in on clouds perfumed with crushed orchids. She wears a gown that shimmers with an optical illusion of eternal superiority. And her throne. Oh, her throne is custom-built, velvet-lined, gilded, and slightly enchanted to emit a faint scent of triumph. There's even a built-in footrest that glows softly when she crosses her ankles, which she does, dramatically. Apollo frowns. Rule 6, he announces, mid-air improvising. No scent enhancements. Hera raises an eyebrow so imperiously that 3 nearby nymphs faint. "Darling," she purrs, settling in. "You made the rules. I made the atmosphere. The rest of the gods grumble. Hermes mouths unfair, but he's been rotating through 7 different poses while technically still seated, so he really doesn't have the moral ground to stand or sit on." Still, Hera's entrance shifts the game. With her throne stealing literal attention from the sun, God himself, the energy changes. Everyone suddenly feels underfurnished. Demeter waves over a dryad to fluff her hay cushion. Artemis sharpens an arrow menacingly every time someone coughs. Dionysus whispers, "Should have brought a couch." Aphrodite asks if she can add satin arm covers to hers for elbow support, darling. Apollo, to his credit, maintains perfect posture, but you can tell his composure is cracking. His eye twitches every time Hera reclines another inch. Historians still argue whether Hera's entry into the Sit-A-Thon was premeditated sabotage or just her natural flair for throne-based power moves. Either way, she becomes the new crowd favorite until Poseidon shows up late with a throne carved from living coral, trailed by 2 seahorses and a very damp entourage. Now it's just absurd. Poseidon plunks himself down, splashing mildly, and declares, "I was meditating underwater. You land gods are too dry. You blink. The throne drips. It smells like a kelp smoothie." One cloud puffs away in protest. Still, Poseidon sits, comfortably, maybe too comfortably. You glance at Apollo. His jaw is tight. His neck is straight. His legs have not moved, but a single bead of radiant sweat rolls down his temple. Then disaster. A creak. Not from Apollo. From Hera's throne. A tiny noise like a mouse walking on eggshells. But in Olympus, every creak echoes like a prophecy. All heads turn. Hera blinks slowly. She shifts 1 inch and the chair creaks again. Louder. This time accompanied by a faint sparkle of magical strain. The enchantment is wearing thin. Now, to be clear, Hera is not heavy. She's divine. But her throne, overloaded with symbols of authority and spite, is starting to crack under the pressure of pride itself. A satyr gasps. One of the cyclopes mutters, "We didn't account for emotional weight." You stifle a laugh, but only barely. Hera stays composed, but her throne begins to list ever so slightly to the left, like a very smug boat taking on self-awareness. Apollo's face smugger than sunrise. You half expect him to break into a victory jig while seated, of course, but he doesn't. He simply lifts one eyebrow and says, "Posture is integrity made visible." You groan, quietly. Hera narrows her eyes. Posture is overrated, and with that she stands, dramatically. The crowd gasps. Her throne sighs with audible relief. And just like that, Hera is out. One goddess down. 10 to go. The Sit-A-Thon continues, chairs creaking, pride wobbling, and you're starting to think this might be the most dramatic act of not moving in divine history. Poseidon shifts in his coral throne, which responds by releasing a small puff of sea mist and the mournful sigh of a disappointed clam. You blink. Was that a barnacle just giving up? Nevertheless, he seems content. His trident rests across his lap like a seatbelt for overcompensation. His damp beard glistens under the Olympian skylight, and he occasionally smirks as if to say, "Water seats you better." You watch the other gods trying in increasingly ridiculous ways to appear both serene and victorious. Demeter is holding very still, but you can tell she's trying to photosynthesize through sheer willpower. Her cushion has sprouted something. Possibly barley, possibly rebellion. Ares, on the other hand, is not doing well. He is a god of war, not a god of waiting. Stillness makes him itchy. He's already attempted 3 shoulder rolls, 2 leg stretches, and 1 unconvincing cough disguised as a tactical exhale. Apollo, ever the stickler, squints at him. "Rule 2, he says clearly, forbids strategic fidgeting. Ares growls. "My quadriceps are divine instruments of pain. They require recalibration. You've never heard a more insecure flex, literally." Aphrodite 2 seats down, sighs, and reapplies celestial lip gloss. "Darling, just lose with dignity like Hera." Ares bristles. He doesn't lose. Not in war, not in arm wrestling, and certainly not in competitive sitting. He grips the arms of his throne, which is made of solid marble and rage, and presses himself into perfect stillness so hard the veins on his forehead start forming constellations. Then he cracks. He twitches just a pinky, but the movement sends a ripple up his bicep, which explodes into a full-body jerk like a flex gone wrong. Apollo, without missing a beat, raises his hand and says, "Disqualified," for visible quake of pride. The crowd erupts, half in laughter, half in groans. Ares leaps to his feet and immediately declares, "This is an act of tyranny," while also rubbing both legs like they're recovering from centuries of battle. Historians still argue whether Ares truly meant to sit still, or whether he secretly hoped for an excuse to leave before his calves gave out. The truth, as usual, is tangled in divine self-image and possibly an old rivalry with Apollo involving insult poetry. Ares storms off. His chair miraculously doesn't collapse, but it does look relieved. Meanwhile, Dionysus is reclining and snacking and drinking. His chair suspiciously has become a sort of floaty chaise lounge piled with grapevines and cheese plates. He's cradling a goblet shaped like a giggling dolphin and murmuring something about turning this whole thing into a lounge-based symposium. "Is that a charcuterie board, you whisper?" He winks. "Would you like a candied olive? It's fermented in song." Technically, he's still seated, but he's also actively partying. This is a gray area. Apollo frowns. Rule 3 prohibits external distractions. Dionysus laughs. "Distraction is a state of mind sunshine." "Remove the wine or be removed," Apollo replies, snapping his fingers dramatically. Dionysus makes a face like someone being asked to choose between blinking and breathing. "Fine. But you just declared war on hydration." He downs the goblet, tosses a fig to a passing muse, and exits with jazz hands. A nymph throws glitter in his wake. No one knows where the glitter came from. You're starting to notice a pattern here. It's not about who can sit the longest. It's about who can sit without surrendering to themselves. Poseidon is still there, damp but steady. Athena hasn't blinked since breakfast. Hermes is suspiciously still. Too still. You'll have to keep an eye on him. Artemis is motionless, eyes fixed on a point somewhere between here and eternity. She might be hunting boredom. And Hestia still on her wooden stool, still serene, still the only one not playing the game but rather being the game. You shiver. This is getting serious. By now, most spectators have either dozed off or reached that zen-like state where you're not entirely asleep, but also wouldn't remember your own name if someone shouted it. You, however, remain oddly alert, entranced by the slow-motion implosion of Olympian dignity. And then with the smooth, unearned confidence of someone who's absolutely going to ruin something beautiful, Apollo stands. Just like that. Not to end the contest, not to concede. Oh no. He stands with the ceremonial purpose of a game show host, and claps his hands twice each clap, sending out a mild solar flare that wilts a few nearby lilies. "I propose," he says, beaming so hard, it reflects off Dionysus's discarded goblet, a formal escalation, the competitive sit-off. You blink. Wasn't this already a sit-off? Apollo continues, clearly pleased with himself. The rules have thus far lacked formality, ceremony, narrative, arc. But now we raise the stakes. Zeus groans from his thunder pillow. "Please tell me this doesn't involve chanting." Apollo ignores him. He conjures a scroll. It unrolls itself dramatically across 3 columns, a small harp, and part of Poseidon's footrest. From this moment forward, he declares the remaining contestants shall participate in an enhanced round of competitive sitting, featuring fixed posture requirements, ceremonial evaluation, and scheduled commentary. Aphrodite, still sipping pomegranate juice from the sidelines, mutters, "So he wants to judge other people for sitting while also sitting." Exactly. Historians still argue whether Apollo's urge to codify leisure was part of a broader pattern of divine micromanagement or just his inability to process emotional discomfort without a scoring rubric. The evidence is quite literally written in the scroll. You lean in as Apollo lists the enhancements: precision spine angle. All backs must form a 92-degree angle from seat to shoulder. Symmetry check legs must be parallel, hands placed equidistant from thighs, thumbs relaxed but not splayed. Face poise. Eyebrows must not raise without cosmic justification. No visible effort. Any evidence of bracing, clenching, or gritting is considered desperation and results in a penalty. And finally, Apollo adds all participants must remain seated for a minimum of 3 more hours, without deviation. Let the true test begin. Artemis raises an eyebrow, but doesn't speak. Her eyes flick toward the sun, as if calculating its position. You get the distinct sense she is timing her stillness. Athena gives the faintest nod, acknowledgement, not agreement. Poseidon mutters something that sounds like, "You're lucky I'm not a fire god." Hestia simply breathes. And then there's Hermes. He's still in the contest. Somehow, suspiciously. You glance at him, trying to gauge his stillness. Too perfect, too composed. His eyes don't blink. They twinkle mischievously. You move closer just a little and notice something odd. Hermes isn't actually sitting. He's floating, millimeters above the seat, legs tucked in a relaxed position, face serene. But if you look closely, there's a whisper of air between fabric and God. A cheat, a technical foul, but brilliant. You whisper, "Hey." He glances at you and winks. Mid-float. Apollo turns toward the sound. Something wrong? You blink. Do you snitch? Do you become part of divine history as the one who exposed Hermes's hover sit before you can decide? A leaf falls from the ambrosia tree and brushes Hermes's foot. He flinches, ever so slightly. But Apollo sees it, and so does everyone else. Disqualified Apollo booms with a level of triumph that borders on operatic. No levitation. Rule 1. Hermes shrugs, rises fully into the air, and lazily flips upside down mid-air as he glides out of the arena. Honestly, he says that was the longest I've ever committed to anything. And then he's gone, leaving a faint scent of cinnamon and mischief behind. You exhale. That's 4 down, Hera, Ares, Dionysus, Hermes. What remains is silence. 5 competitors, 4 seats, and an idea that's grown far bigger than its founder ever expected. You settle back into your plush cloud cushion, somewhat overstuffed, mildly sticky from a fallen ambrosia slice, and watch as round 2 of competitive sitting enters its refined, rule-bound phase. Apollo now paces, which in the context of a sitting contest feels like cheating in spirit, if not in form. From his position just off the competition ring, he circles the seated gods with the air of a divine maître d', with delusions of grandeur. In his hand is a long, gold-tipped measuring stick, probably symbolic, but also definitely being used to poke people's posture. First he approaches Poseidon, who remains remarkably composed on his damp throne of coral and sea foam. His beard undulates gently in a non-existent breeze, like kelp swaying in underwater meditation. Apollo narrows his eyes. Your foot is aquatically extended, he says, tapping Poseidon's big toe, which protrudes from one sandal. It's relaxed, Poseidon rumbles. It's rebellious, Apollo counters. A small wave rises behind Poseidon's chair. It's unclear whether it's meant to intimidate or to hydrate. Apollo backs off. Minor infraction. Noted. Next he inspects Artemis. Still. Sharp. Regal. So motionless, in fact, that a dragonfly has landed on her nose and she hasn't blinked. Apollo stares. You're making it weird. She blinks once. The dragonfly drops dead. Apollo walks away. Then he approaches Athena. She meets his gaze like a scroll unrolling in slow defiance. Her spine is a column. Her breath is nearly imperceptible. A thin book rests on her lap, closed per the rules, but positioned so deliberately that it exudes silent judgment. Attempting to weaponize symbolism, Apollo asks. She says nothing, which is in and of itself an act of war. Historians still argue whether Athena's performance was an expression of Stoic philosophy or a passive-aggressive protest against Apollo's increasingly bureaucratic behavior. The ambiguity only enhances her legend. Apollo finally turns to Hestia. Still on the plain stool. No back, no padding, no performance. She sits like stillness incarnate, not forced, not stiff, just settled. Apollo tilts his head. How are you? Not in pain. Hestia speaks softly like a fireplace just before the logs fall in. It's not pain if you're not trying to win. You feel a shift, not in the arena, but in the air. The kind of shift that only happens when someone quietly breaks the game without breaking the rules. Apollo looks shaken. Just for a moment. Then he straightens, reasserting his sunshiny authority. To keep things fair, he says, I'm instituting pose trials, brief tests, to ensure everyone is maintaining the appropriate divine tension. The gods groan. Artemis raises one eyebrow. Did you invent this rule 3 minutes ago? Apollo smiles. It's retroactively ancient. The pose trials begin. Each remaining god is required to hold a new position for 5 minutes, without cushions shifting brows, furrowing, or grace evaporating. Poseidon is first. He must cross one leg over the other while maintaining back symmetry. He does it but only by freezing his torso into an exact replica of a Greco-Roman statue titled Man Enduring Mild Inconvenience. Next up, Athena. She must sit sideways, legs together, arms folded, not unlike a philosophical professor waiting for her students to catch up. She passes, obviously, though a faint aura of, "I have better things to do," lingers around her. Then Artemis, her pose. One leg tucked under the other, hands in lap gaze forward. She does not move. She may not even be breathing. One could place an apple on her head, and it would fossilize before falling off. And finally, Hestia. Apollo hesitates before assigning her pose. Do this. He sits on a nearby rock and demonstrates a twist that looks suspiciously like it came from a mortal yoga class. Easy. Hestia gently mirrors the posture, then settles into it as if she'd always been sitting that way. Apollo watches. You watch him watching her. He scratches his head. "You're very good at this." Hestia nods. "I practice. Every time someone builds a hearth." Historians still argue whether that line was metaphor divine insight or the most wholesome flex in mythological record. Possibly all three. The pose trials end with no disqualifications but a definite shift in morale. Apollo is no longer in control. Not really. And the audience feels it too. The muses start humming a lullaby. A cyclops dozes off holding a scoreboard. Somewhere in the back, Dionysus is heard muttering in his sleep, "Never trust a beanbag." And above it all, the remaining gods continue to sit, not as rivals now, but as monuments to their own stubborn, exquisite stillness. The Amphithronos Maximus is now blanketed in a strange hush, a silence so deep you can hear the golden pollen drifting off Apollo's discarded laurel crown. You shift slightly in your own seat, careful not to draw attention, because what you're witnessing isn't just the climax of a silly celestial contest, it's a spiritual stalemate made of muscle cramps and unspoken metaphysics. The Sit-A-Thon has officially entered its most dangerous phase, the great butt numbing. It creeps up slowly. First a tingling in the outer thigh. Then a whisper of static behind the knee. Then bam, a full-blown existential reckoning in the tailbone. You glance at Poseidon, who is looking increasingly uncomfortable. His coral throne, once majestic, now appears to be pinching something internal. Every shift in his weight is followed by a delayed squelch like a sea sponge giving up. Athena holds steady, though her eyes occasionally flick towards the horizon. Not a blink, not a breath, but you sense the calculation behind those pupils. She's running probability models in her head. How long will Hestia last? Will Artemis flinch? Is Poseidon's fidgeting legally admissible? Speaking of which, he moves again. Just a little. Enough to make his throne issue a low aquatic blorp. Apollo appears out of nowhere. Movement, Poseidon grumbles. The sea shifts. It's its nature. Your butt shifted, Apollo says. The ocean is not your scapegoat. Historians still argue whether Poseidon was disqualified for squirming or for metaphor abuse. In any case, Apollo considers. Then he shrugs. Penalty 1, hymn of humiliation. Poseidon blinks. What? Before he can object, a muse steps forward and begins to sing a ballad, soft, ethereal, and devastatingly catchy, titled The Wiggle of the Wave King. The chorus includes backup nymphs. There are hand gestures. Poseidon slinks lower in his chair, but he's still technically sitting. You look over at Artemis, who started staring directly at you. Not into you, just through you. You suspect she's entered some kind of ancient hunter's trance. Her body has become stone. A small butterfly lands on her shoulder. She doesn't move. Then a second one. Then a third. She is now Queen of Butterflies. Hestia, meanwhile, has changed poses again. Not because she had to, just because it flowed. You didn't even see the movement happen. One second she's upright, the next she's in what mortals would call cozy, grandmother at a winter window posture, hands on lap, legs crossed at the ankle, warmth radiating from her as if she is the hearth. Apollo is clearly unsettled. He's walking in circles now, muttering to himself. This was supposed to be dignified, inspirational, trend-setting. From somewhere in the sky, a faint voice echoes. It's mostly boring. He scowls. It's supposed to be boring. That's the point. A hush falls again. Then suddenly from the edge of the arena, a noise erupts. A musical, unmistakable, deeply human sound. You blink. Did someone just... Yes. Zeus, the king of the gods, has, let's say, disturbed the ambiance with a thunderous, well-aged, majestic fart. There's a pause. A collective pause. No one dares move. Not even Apollo. Then Zeus, eyes still closed, murmurs, "Blame the nectar stew." You stifle a giggle. Artemis's eyebrow twitches. Poseidon snorts, then winces. And then finally Apollo breaks. He laughs. Just once. Short, sharp, involuntary. Like a sneeze made of disbelief. And that's enough. Involuntary laughter, Athena declares, crisply. Rule 5. But that was biological, Apollo protests. A surprise attack. Still a lapse in composure, she says, lips twitching. Besides, your rulebook allows no exceptions for emotional gas. Zeus chuckles. That's not what Hera said. Apollo looks around, realizes he's just been outmaneuvered on every level. His own contest, his own rules, his own downfall. He exhales, stands, and gracefully steps out of the ring. There is no announcement, no grand farewell, just the quiet resignation of a sun god who has been outsat by silence and sincerity. You lean back, awed. 4 gods remain. Only one chair creaks now, and the air smells faintly of roasted root vegetables and defeat. With Apollo gone, his cape dimmed his dignity, slightly wrinkled the atmosphere inside the Amphithronos. Maximus shifts. It's as if the temperature has dropped 1 divine degree. The air feels softer, like Olympus itself, just sighed in relief. Only 4 competitors remain: Athena, Poseidon, Artemis, and Hestia, each a pillar of a very different sort of strength. And you're still nestled in your possibly sentient cushion, watching history unfold at a glacial, gloriously uneventful pace. Poseidon, though still seated, is clearly starting to lose the war against moisture-based discomfort. His coral throne has become less of a majestic aquatic symbol and more of a very large, very soggy sponge. A crab has taken up residence on the armrest. The sea god shifts again, and this time there's no ambiguity. His whole upper body leans slightly sideways. His trident tilts. His dignity sloshes. Athena watches this with the calm interest of someone recording a time-lapse in her mind. Incorrect spinal axis, she says, without turning her head. I'm adjusting for tide pressure, Poseidon replies, using a voice better suited for shouting over tempests. From a coral chair, he growls. You know it. He knows it. He's about to lose. But being Poseidon, he doesn't go quietly. He stands abruptly, spraying seawater in all directions and shouts, the sea was never meant to be confined to one spot. Then he kicks over his throne, which explodes into dramatic sea foam and a family of startled clams. One of the clams gives you a look like, this is why we don't visit the surface. And with that, Poseidon exits, dripping, brooding, and muttering something about earthquakes. The audience politely claps. One nymph throws a sponge. Historians still argue whether Poseidon truly meant to compete, or just wanted to make an entrance and an exit dramatic enough to distract from his inability to remain seated for more than 6 hours. Either way, he's out, and now just 3 gods remain. The tension is palpable. Even Zeus has stopped farting. Athena sits tall and unwavering, but a tiny muscle in her cheek is beginning to twitch. Could be fatigue, could be strategy. Artemis looks like she hasn't moved since the Bronze Age. She's now wearing a crown of butterflies and moss. A blue jay is attempting to build a nest on her left shoulder. And Hestia still there, still stool-bound, still glowing with that soft hearth warmth energy like someone who doesn't need to win, and therefore just might. Apollo, now observing from the sidelines and drinking something citrusy, leans over and whispers to no one in particular, "I created a monster. A very stationary monster." Suddenly Hermes reappears, not to rejoin the contest, but to announce a new development. He holds a scroll, which he unrolls with a flourish. "I've been polling the crowd," he says. And they're getting bored. Everyone groans. That was the point. So Hermes adds with a wink, "I propose we spice things up, surprise interruption round." Artemis finally blinks. Athena stiffens. Hermes conjures 3 identical goblets, places them on a tray, and says, "Inside one is pure ambrosia. The other 2 contain fermented satyr root. Disgusting, but technically drinkable." The catch. Each god must sip one without making a face. It's an absurd twist, but also very Hermes. The goblets float toward the contestants. Athena sips, expression exactly the same as before. No twitch, no nose crinkle, just book club poker face. Artemis sips, eyes narrow slightly. You sense internal screaming, but no external reaction. Hestia sips. She smiles, warmly, kindly, as if the root reminded her of a childhood stew she once cooked in a mortal village kitchen. Hermes nods. Well then, all 3 pass. The crowd sighs. Apollo mutters, "Of course she liked it." Then Athena's eye twitches, just slightly, just once. But in this hyper-observed, rule-obsessed environment, it's seismic. Artemis notices. Hestia notices. You notice. Athena resets her face. Too late. Hermes raises a brow. Facial expression deviation. Artemis nods. Athena Hermes asks. She exhales. Just a breath, but full of philosophical resignation. And then she stands. With grace. With dignity. With something that sounds suspiciously like relief. She bows faintly toward the other 2. I concede. But let it be known I only blinked because the logic of this contest collapsed. Historians still argue whether Athena lost out of exhaustion or on principle. But one thing is clear, she left the game with more grace than most enter it. Now only 2 remain. Artemis, the huntress, still as a statue in moonlight. Hestia, the hearth radiating undisturbed warmth. And you pull the blanket tighter around yourself. It's getting quiet now. Quiet like stories before dreams. So here you are. 2 goddesses remain. The final phase of a contest no one asked for, few believed in, and absolutely no mortal would ever bother to record except you, lucky sleepy you, who somehow ended up as witness to the Olympian sit-off of eternal glory and moderate sciatica. On the left, Artemis, goddess of the hunt of moonlight and apparently of single-handedly holding the same position for 12 consecutive hours. The butterflies have multiplied. There is now a small squirrel perched on her elbow, casually nibbling a fig. She hasn't blinked since sunrise. On the right, Hestia, goddess of the hearthkeeper of domestic calm, radiating the same exact energy as someone who just poured you a cup of tea and told you to rest because everything's going to be just fine. The amphitheater has gone still. Even Zeus is alert, perched with one hand under his chin like a curious toddler. Apollo, now entirely dethroned both metaphorically and quite literally, is curled on a chaise made of discarded rule scrolls, whispering, It wasn't supposed to end like this while sipping lukewarm citrus. Hermes has started selling commemorative spoons with each contestant's face carved into the handle. But your eyes are on the two remaining figures locked in a quiet, serene, metaphysical battle of endurance and not caring. Because here's the thing, Artemis is trying to win. And Hestia? She's not. Historians still argue whether Artemis, in her quest for stillness, actually became more stone than goddess. Her posture is so symmetrical, so impossibly balanced, you half expect birds to start nesting in her hair. One owl lands on her head. She doesn't react. Somewhere a mortal hunter wakes up in the night, suddenly inspired to stand still forever. But then, you see it, a tiny flicker. Her lips move, only slightly. A whisper, maybe you lean in, ears, straining. Is she reciting a prayer, a moon hymn? And then Artemis exhales. It's soft, it's controlled, but it's intentional. Hermes steps forward, eyes wide. Was that a mantra? Artemis opens her eyes, yes. She had them closed all this time and simply says, I have reached the center of stillness. And I am done. She stands. The amphitheater gasps. Zeus inhales so sharply a thundercloud vanishes. Apollo's sun cup shatters in disbelief. You gape. Did Artemis just retire in peace? She walks off the platform, her pace slow and rhythmic, like someone who's never rushed for anything in her immortal life. A deer joins her, nodding solemnly. The squirrel tips its nut in farewell. And then there was one. Hestia. Still seated. Still serene. Still exactly as she was at the start. No fanfare, no accessories, no throne of excess. Just a plain wooden stool and the quiet, steady presence of someone who never needed an audience. The amphitheater erupts, or rather it erupts as tastefully as an ancient celestial amphitheater can erupt. There's polite applause, a spontaneous chime of celebratory lyres. A small satyr hands Hestia a wreath of rosemary, which she humbly accepts and places in her lap rather than her head. Hermes floats above and announces, by rule and reality, the winner of the first and possibly last Olympian competitive sit-off is Hestia of the hearth, patron of patience, matriarch of mellow. She smiles. Just a little. And then she stands, stretches once. Not a flashy stretch, but one that says, I've been holding the world together for eons, let me have this one knee pop, and gives a small nod of gratitude. Apollo tries to clap, but accidentally sun flares again. Zeus mutters something about replacing all the thrones with recliners. Hermes starts printing Hestia 4 chair forever on tote bags. And you can't help but feel calm. This wasn't a tale of war or wisdom or even vanity. It was a story of stillness, of comfort, of knowing who you are and being perfectly okay with staying that way even when everyone else is busy being dazzling. Historians still argue whether Hestia's win changed anything in Olympus, but for a little while divine meetings were quieter chairs, more comfortable, and nobody yelled about assigned seating, except Apollo. But he was given a beanbag and told to deal with it. In the calm after the competition, a soft drizzle begins to fall over Olympus. Not rain exactly, but something more poetic dew made of divine applause, a subtle shimmering mist that glints like stardust and smells faintly of lavender and long overdue naps. You remain nestled on your spectator cloud, watching as the gods begin to stir from their cushions, stretch their immortal limbs, and pretend they weren't emotionally invested in a literal sitting contest. Zeus stands first, cracking his knees so loudly it startles a constellation into rearranging itself, and claps exactly once. Right then, he says, rubbing his back. Next time a lying down contest. Apollo, still glowing faintly from embarrassment, mutters, Next time I pick the category. Athena brushes imaginary dust off her robes, and walks up to Hestia. No bow, no fanfare, just a small nod of deep respect. Hestia returns it with a warmth that feels like a blanket being tucked around your feet. Around them, the arena begins to dissolve. The thrones vanish. The cushions float back to wherever cloud furniture lives. The crowd dissipates, slowly chatting in low tones like mortals leaving a theater where no one clapped too loud for fear of waking someone. You hover there for a moment longer watching Hestia. She's standing now surrounded by nothing and needing nothing. She doesn't claim victory. She doesn't bask. She just exists as if the contest hadn't ended but simply resolved itself around her. Then, as if sensing your gaze, she turns her head slightly, just enough to catch your eye. And she smiles. Not broadly, not performatively, just enough. And you feel it, a little flame flickering in your chest. Not excitement, not triumph, just peace. Hermes flutters over, breaking the spell. So he says, offering you a scroll that reads, "Official witness of the great sit-off." How would you rate the entertainment value, be honest? There's a survey. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Wasn't boring, was it? And honestly, it was. Gloriously so. The kind of boring that wraps around your brain like a lullaby. The kind that soothes instead of stimulates. The kind that reminds you that stillness, true deliberate stillness, is not laziness or failure or giving up. It's a form of mastery, a kind of quiet wisdom that doesn't need thunderbolts or musical solos or even fancy chairs. Just breath, balance, and if you're lucky, a good stool. Historians still argue whether Hestia ever participated in another competition. Most say no. One scroll claims she once won a staring contest against a mirror, but that's probably apocryphal. What everyone does agree on is this: for a brief, shimmering moment, all of Olympus learned to sit, to be still, to listen to the quiet in their bones. And then, of course, everything went back to chaos. Because they're gods, and subtlety doesn't last long in Olympus. But that one moment, that was hers. And somehow it's yours now, too. You close your eyes. The breeze hums like a lullaby sung by clouds. And somewhere far away, a chair creaks contentedly. By the time you rise from your cushion, your legs slightly numb, your sense of time completely obliterated, the arena has returned to what it was before, an expanse of floating marble where nothing in particular happens unless someone insists on it very loudly, and preferably with lightning. The gods have mostly wandered off. Ares is now arm-wrestling a tree. Dionysus is organizing a silent disco, attended only by dryads, and one very confused goat. Apollo has announced a new series of educational sun-based TED Talks entitled Photosynthesis and You a Radiant Journey. He has one subscriber himself. But you're still thinking about Hestia, and so apparently is Olympus, because something strange is beginning to happen. In every corner of the divine realm, chairs are quietly being replaced, not with grand thrones, but with simple, unassuming stools. Not because anyone ordered it, not because of official decree, but because for once the gods seem to agree that less is more. You visit Athena's hall and find her seated on a modest bench made of olive wood. She's reading, yes, but also just sitting. No armor, no arguments. You pass by Artemis, who's perched on a tree stump beside a pool, watching a moonlit ripple without urgency. Even Poseidon has swapped his coral monstrosity for a driftwood stool anchored in a tide pool. He says it helps him feel more grounded. You don't point out the irony. Historians still argue whether this wave of minimalism was intentional or simply a side effect of everyone realizing their lower backs weren't in fact immortal. But the stool renaissance is real. They begin appearing in temples painted into frescoes carved discreetly into columns. Ares has one made of swords. It's deeply uncomfortable, but he insists it builds character. Aphrodite's is velvet-covered and scented, but still technically a stool. And in the mortal world, mortals begin to dream of a woman with soft eyes and fire in her hands. They find themselves drawn to corners of their homes they'd previously ignored. They start lighting candles, baking bread, rearranging chairs to face windows instead of walls. They sit, not out of laziness, not to rest, but to be. You realize slowly that the contest you witnessed wasn't really about posture or stamina, or even the spectacle of divine egos colliding. It was about something far older, far deeper. It was about choosing stillness. In a realm of thunder and prophecy of wars and whirlwinds, Hestia reminded them. And you that stillness is a force, too. You find her again some days later at the edge of Olympus. She's seated, of course. No one else is around. You approach quietly. She gestures to a second stool beside her. You sit. She says nothing. You say nothing. And the silence that follows is the best kind, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled, only shared. A small fire flickers in her palm. It doesn't burn. It warms, and in that warmth you understand something. Not all myths are loud. Some slip into your bones like tea on a cold morning. Some glow even when everything else fades. And some, like the story of a goddess who outsat Olympus, linger long after the applause is over. Days pass, or maybe hours. Time in Olympus has always been less of a clock and more of a polite suggestion. Seasons are largely ornamental, and calendars exist mostly to schedule feasts and thunderbolt rehearsals. But ever since Hestia's quietly triumphant win, something has shifted. The gods are restless, but not in their usual smite first, reflect later kind of way. Instead, they've developed a collective case of what can only be described as reflective fidgeting. You find Athena composing new philosophical treatises with titles like The Ethics of Elbow Placement and Stillness as metaphysical defiance. Her owl now perches not on her shoulder, but on her meditation bench. Apollo he's rebranding. Again, he's decided to launch a wellness initiative, Sit Like the Sun, which includes overpriced scrolls on posture, radiant breathing, and oddly competitive humming. The logo features a very smug-looking chair. Hermes is making a fortune selling souvenir mini-stools that allegedly glow if you meditate near them. Most just smell like pine and self-deception. But Hestia, she hasn't changed at all. She's not building a brand. She's not giving interviews. She's not teaching masterclasses on how to win by doing absolutely nothing for 8 hours while seated on a plank. She just sits. And this curiously makes the gods more uneasy than any throne-toppling war ever did. Historians still argue whether Olympus was fundamentally altered by that sit-off or simply experienced a temporary outbreak of humility. Most agree that for a short, beautiful time, the gods flirted with the idea that greatness might not need trumpets. Even Ares, who once screamed at a shrub for brushing against him disrespectfully, is now rumored to have taken up stillness, which in his case means he scowls on a bench for 20 minutes each morning and calls it victory. You decide to walk down the winding paths of Olympus, past colonnades and pools and sky bridges. You pass minor gods practicing their serene gazes in reflective surfaces. You overhear a satyr attempting to teach a dryad how to exude stillness without looking sleepy. It's not going well. Eventually you reach the edge of the realm, the Hearth Temple. It's not grand, no gold, no crystal spires, just a simple round space warm with firelight and filled with the scent of baked apples and old stories. Hestia is there, of course. Still seated, still still. You sit beside her again. You're starting to suspect that's the only way to speak with her. I think you begin softly, they're trying to become you. She smiles, her gaze fixed on the fire. They're trying to become still. Isn't that the same thing? She shakes her head gently. Stillness isn't about becoming anything. It's about not becoming for a while. You pause. Let the fire crackle. Let her words settle like flour in a bowl. Did you ever want to win? You ask. She turns her head toward you, eyes as steady as a sunrise. No, I just didn't want to hurry. And that's it. No long speech, no parable, just the kind of answer that sits with you longer than it should. You stay there a while, not for glory, not for history, but because something about this corner of Olympus feels truer than all the statues and scrolls combined. Outside, the gods return to being loud and lightning-filled, but here, stillness holds. And somehow it's enough. The rumors start gently, like all great myths do. At first, it's just whispers that Hestia's victory has sparked a movement, that temples across Greece are adopting a stool of contemplation, that mortals are setting aside time each day to just sit. But then the stories evolve. A farmer claims his crops grew taller after he spent 10 minutes quietly watching them with Hestia-level stillness. A baker swears his bread rose better when he stopped pacing and sat by the oven. One sculptor insists he chiseled the most symmetrical knees of his life after 32 minutes of peaceful non-action. Soon, cities begin dedicating quiet corners, unadorned spaces, where no transactions occur, no debates are held, and no one's allowed to lecture about democracy. Just stone benches and olive trees. People come, not to talk, just to breathe. You watch from Olympus as the idea travels softly, stubbornly. Even the gods take notice. Zeus raises an eyebrow when an oracle refuses to deliver his weather demands because she's mid-stillness. Poseidon frowns when he finds a coastal village holding silent Sunday, during which no one enters the sea, and everyone just sits on driftwood and listens to waves. Aphrodite is the only one who seems genuinely pleased. Stillness makes the heart more visible, she says one day, sipping lavender tea from a cup shaped like a reclining cat. Apollo, of course, has launched a full counterbrand, Radiant Motion. He claims rest is a form of kinetic suspension. His followers wear glittery sandals and speak exclusively in affirmations. But Hestia still not promoting anything, still not correcting anyone, still simply seated. Even during the Council of Posture, which Zeus convenes out of mild irritation and moderate insecurity, his throne has been creaking lately. He blames the atmosphere. The council debates whether to formalize the sit-off as a yearly event, whether to create tiers of divine recognition, stillness, sage posture, paladin, and ultimate unmover. They design medals, logos, a short anthem. Then Hestia stands up just once during the council. No speech, no thunderclap, just standing, and the room quiets. She walks to the window no one knew Olympus even had windows, and looks down at the mortal world. Fires flicker in hearths, candles glow in windows. Someone is kneeling beside a stew pot, whispering a story into bubbling broth. "I don't need a title," she says softly. "Let them just sit." And then she sits again. End of discussion. Zeus mutters something about how we're gods, not furniture, and adjourns the meeting early. Everyone pretends they're fine with that. Later, you see Artemis crafting a new bow, but she does it while seated on a flat rock, humming quietly. You see Athena writing a scroll titled War and Peaceful Observation, a paradoxical manual. Even Ares is spotted doing something approximating yoga, though he claims he was merely lunging aggressively in slow motion. And you've stopped narrating so loudly inside your own head. You've begun to enjoy the spaces between the words, the pauses, the quiet. You return to the hearth temple one last time. There's a new stool beside Hestia now, not because she made it, but because someone left it there. You sit. She doesn't say anything. and you don't need her to. The fire crackles, and the silence says everything. It's nearly dusk in Olympus. Not because the sun is setting, Apollo would never allow that without at least 5 musical cues, but because something in the air feels dimmer, quieter, like a lull before the stars clock in for their night shift. You're back where it all began. Not in the Amphithronus Maximus, which has since been dismantled and repurposed into garden seating, but in a smaller, unremarkable courtyard near the edge of the clouds. Here, beneath a modest olive tree, Hestia is, of course, seated, and beside her, an empty stool. You take it. No drama, no fanfare, just 2 figures. A little fire, the hush of a realm remembering how to breathe. The other gods occasionally pass by, not to boast or lecture, but to linger. Ares stops to ask if sitting can count as active recovery. Athena occasionally joins with scrolls, but ends up reading none of them. Hermes tries to sell Hestia a cushion once. She declines. He shrugs and gifts it to a goat. Even Zeus, who once ruled with thunder and mood swings, now sits near the temple hearth more often. His throne still looms sure, but he rests here, with a mug, and surprisingly good posture. And so Olympus becomes slightly more bearable. There are still storms and epics and the occasional multi-headed fiasco, but in between, there's quiet, there's space, there's time to sit, to notice the crackle of wood, the swirl of steam from a cup, the way wind moves through laurel leaves like fingers through a harp. Historians still argue whether this subtle shift in divine behavior saved civilization, delayed its collapse, or just resulted in a sharp uptick in stool-related art commissions. But what no one debates is this: Hestia's presence made the gods less theatrical and the moments more human. Even the mortals noticed. In their temples they began offering not just wine and gold, but silence. They'd sit near the hearth and say nothing. Just breathe, listen, be. Children began to hear the story of how the goddess who never fought, never tricked, never flamed out in scandal, won a contest of cosmic importance by simply sitting still. They giggled at first, but then they'd try it. And sometimes sitting quietly by a fire, a child would feel something flicker inside. Not heat, not pride, but peace. And that peace would stay long after the ashes cooled, long after the myths were replaced. Because some stories don't burn bright, they burn steady. Like Hestia. Like now. You close your eyes. There's nothing left to prove, just the stillness and the seat beneath you. So now let your breath slow, let your shoulders soften, let the noise of Olympus fade into the gentle hush of a flickering hearth, one that doesn't demand attention, doesn't blaze with drama, but simply warms. You're no longer in a coliseum of competition, nor drifting through divine drama. You're somewhere quiet, somewhere simple. You're beside Hestia now, or maybe you are Hestia, in a way, holding stillness like a secret, holding peace like it was always meant to fit in your palms. You notice the way your body fits the space it's in, the way the air rests gently against your skin, the way even your thoughts begin to stretch and slow like cats curling into themselves beside a fire. In this moment, there's no story to finish. No plot twist to prepare for, no audience to impress, just the rhythm of your breath, the warmth in your chest, and the sturdy, silent strength of being still. There will be movement later. There will be decisions and interruptions and alarms, but not yet. Not here. Right now the world can wait. Let your thoughts drift soft and aimless like ash rising into a night sky. Let go of the urge to chase or shape or fix. You've already arrived. And in that quiet, where even the gods dare not speak too loudly, you rest, you settle, you glow, and somewhere a goddess smiles, Because stillness, it turns out, was never boring. It was sacred. And so are you. Good night. Sweet dreams.